It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I'd like to start with you. I think it's safe to say that quite a few legal experts anticipate a guilty verdict in the Trump trial that's going on in New York right now. I know this is early. Things can change dramatically in a courtroom, but this is the first time we will have had somebody running for president that I'm aware of that is found guilty of a felony. Does that change anything in this world of ours now?
Well, it's hard to know. I should say at the outset that I am not a lawyer. I only play one on Fromm and Fuller. But I actually, most, my experience would say that what Donald Trump has gone through is disqualifying. And whether he's found guilty or not, this whole process has never before been seen. And yet, he continues to maintain levels of support that are kind of astounding. I think, though, that it gets harder and harder for him to win over people in the middle, who, if nothing else, are just fatigued by this whole scene. And if found guilty, and then what happens? I mean, is he sentenced? I mean, it's like one cascading bad story after another, and yet he perseveres. But I think, as I've said, I think that what's telling in these primary elections, and especially in some of these really close states that are going to determine the outcome in all likelihood, the number of Republicans who are not coming out to vote is significant. And I think that's a fatigue factor. I think they just don't feel. They might tell pollsters they support Trump, but they just don't get motivated to come out and vote. So I think the probably most important aspect of this is not what Republican voters tell pollsters, but whether they're more likely to vote for him or less likely to vote at all come November. And that's a big problem for him. And I really think that what we talked about before, I really think the problem for Biden is that the voters are most concerned about the economy and how they feel about it. And therein lies a huge problem because the perception doesn't match the reality. The reality is far better than the perception. But the second problem, a recent Harris poll shows, is that people, like 2 out of 3, don't know who they can trust anymore when it comes to the economy. So here sits a president with numbers that are actually numbers that almost any administration I've ever been associated with would like to embrace, like to have to talk about. And yet the public doesn't see it as positive as it is, and they don't really trust Biden or the administration to change their point of view. So there's precious little time. There's a huge perception issue. And Trump's numbers aren't going to move much. The question is, in my mind, whether he can move voters to come out and actually vote for him in the numbers that the polls suggest.
Al, I'd like you to chime in. I mean, do you feel like there could be any change in our political landscape?
Well, first of all, I guess it's likely that he'll be convicted, but it's also possible that there'll be a hung jury, that one juror just won't go along. But just assuming he is, it's hard to see how it helps him, but and particularly among the small group of independent voters that may still be considering voting for him. But I just guess that most likely it's going to reinforce the choices that voters have already made. This will be the first time a presidential candidate is convicted of a felony, I guess, but he's also been found liable for fraud. He's had his university closed for fraud. He owes $500 million in fines for his financial wrongdoings. He's been found, or at least a judge has said that he's committed the equivalent of rape, sexual abuse. Doesn't seem to hurt. I mean, sort of reinforces his base. Now, I saw a poll yesterday by Quinnipiac that says 1 in 5 voters said they'd be less likely to vote for Trump if he's convicted, but 1 in 10 said they're more likely. You know, I'd take those polls with a grain of salt, a big grain of salt. Look, both Biden, as Craig said, I mean, both Biden and Trump have, pretty low ratings. I mean, half the voters said they won't vote for Trump, but also half the voters say they won't vote for Biden. I've just been going over some private polling that shows it's a dead heat in the swing states that are going to decide the election. But to this point, Trump's vote is more intense than Biden's, which is why I've always thought Biden was more vulnerable to a third-party candidate. But what I guess I'd say that if he's convicted, it's possible that it will soften some of Trump's support on the edges. In a race as close as this one, that could make a difference. But frankly, I just don't know.
So one thing, Craig, that indicates where the Republican Party is going is former Governor Haley has announced that she is going to support Donald Trump after spending a year or so trying to take the nomination away from him. What gives?
I guess I'm not sure. On the other hand, I think Nikki Haley is very savvy, and she wants to go help Republicans. She wants to rebuild the Republican Party. I think her statement that she will vote for Donald Trump, which is what she said, gets past this question that she would face every time she's out campaigning for Republicans, which is, are you going to support Donald Trump or not? So she answered the question, but she answered it in the most limited of ways, by which I mean she said she'd vote for him. She didn't tell her supporters to support him. She didn't say she's going to raise money for him. She said she would vote for him. And she furthermore made it clear that she hopes that Donald Trump will reach out to those hundreds of thousands, probably a million people who do support her, and suggested that he perhaps hasn't reached out. So there are other steps to come. The pundits immediately said, oh, well, suddenly she's interested in being vice president. I'm not so sure. If she is, I have one message. There's not much clarity in politics, but I will say one thing. Nikki, don't do it. This would be living hell for 4 years. And the reason for that is that Donald Trump is loyal to no one. And he exhibits what is the most damaging kind of element in any relationship, whether it's professional or personal or whatever, and that's disdain. He has disdain for her. He showed it during the campaign. It will not go away. This is not the person she knew when she served in the United Nations. This is a guy who's upset with her because she chose to run against him. Then she stayed in the race. Now she has a following of her own. None of these things will make life for her easy in that administration. And as Al and I both know, the ability to be successful as a vice president is almost 100% dependent on the president and those people close to him, because it's that combination. Because if the president isn't clearly supportive, the people around him are not going to be, and suddenly this individual becomes very, very isolated, and it can happen just like that. And so I think she knows that. And while ambitious, I think her ambition lies more in the process of helping Republicans get elected and rebuilding a party post the November election, which no matter how it comes out, Donald Trump will not be on the ballot again.
I don't think she's as savvy as she is ambitious. Uh, I mean, I must say, I wasn't surprised. I mean, Nikki Haley, I was disappointed because I thought she ran a good campaign, and I've talked about that a lot. I thought if she had been the Republican nominee, she'd sweep the victory. But sometimes you reveal your character in interesting ways, and she, I mean, she said first that she wouldn't run if Trump ran, and then she decided to run because he changed and for the worse. And she ran I thought, in the end, a very strong campaign in a marketplace that that was unwilling to buy her product because it's so controlled by Trump and the Trumpies. But I watched this morning a litany of the things she said within the last 4 months, and it's hard to reconcile deciding to vote for Trump with somebody who, I mean, her answer to the first question you had today was the voters won't vote for a convicted criminal. Uh, uh, she called him unstable and unhinged, said he wasn't qualified to get a driver's license, let alone be president. Uh, that it wasn't normal to spend $50 million of campaign money on personal legal expenses. Talked about how he buddied up to Putin, got weak in the knees whenever he was with Putin, called on Russia to invade NATO countries. The list goes on and on. And it seemed to be, and then in her speech, she made a powerful case before she said she was going to vote for Trump for backing Ukraine when Trump wants to concede Ukraine to the Russians. It seems to me he represents everything she said against everything he represents is against what she said she stands for.
Yeah.
And so, and then Trump, as Craig indicated, doesn't have any regard for her. He told her he doesn't want, her supporters aren't wanted in MAGA. And so, and the other interesting thing is she continues to get a big vote, even though she's out of the race. I mean, 1 in 5 Republican voters vote for her. My guess is that's less of a vote for her than it is a vote against Trump. Craig has been making that point, and I think that's right. But, so you'd think maybe her strategy would be, one, to wait it out, see if something happened to Trump. If, we'll know in 2 weeks this is going to be a convicted criminal. And if a convicted criminal can't win, who would be standing by? And if she wants to build the party in the long term, you got to plant a flag. And kissing the ring is not planting a flag. And so what I'd say, it tells you a lot about the state of the Republican Party, that you have to kiss the ring to have any place in that party. But it tells you an awful lot about her personal ambition. And all politicians are ambitious. I have no problem with that. But sometimes, like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger or Mitt Romney, you just have to put principle over personal ambition.
Craig, I have to, I'd like to leave with this interesting development, and both of you should be very proud of your alma maters, that both presidents of UCLA and Northwestern have been called to testify in Washington, D.C. on how they've handled campus protests. Why would a president say yes to that? Why fuel that kind of engagement?
I'll tell you, getting in front of Congress is always a bit of risky business, and especially if you don't do it fairly frequently. It's an acquired skill, in my view. So I suspect they think, like so many do, that they have important things to say and that those important things will they'll be allowed to say them, number one, they'll be heard, number two, and they'll be persuasive, number three, none of which, by the way, may be true when they get in front of Congress. They get 5 minutes and then a red light goes on, and the questioning can be harsh, and I suspect they want to represent their institution, and they want to explain to those who, are close to one or both of the institutions. They want to be heard, and they want to explain what they did and why they did it. But it's a precarious course for them, and a good foreign trip might have been in order for to avoid the hearing.
Al, the last word.
Well, I suppose that university presidents believe it's their civic duty to testify when asked. I mean, I think they probably have a different view of what a congressional hearing is than we do. Having put many on, you know that it's not for the witnesses, it's for the members. And, I think what Craig said is right. But they probably also are worried about the repercussions of turning down Congress. I mean, I'm sure that both of those universities, while Northwestern is one of the wealthiest private institutions, and UCLA is now the flagship school in public college in California, depend on a lot of federal money, and I think they worry that if they give the back of their hand to the majority in Congress, that maybe there'll be some repercussions on that side too. But it's in this case, they should have learned from the first round of presidents.
I was going to say.
It's a no-win deal, and I think they're going to be before Representative Fox in North Carolina, and Elise Stefanik will probably be on that committee, or at least in those hearings. She usually is. While I've sometimes sympathized with their point of view, I just think everything about it they're doing is for the wrong reasons. And I hate to see university presidents get caught up in that.
Well, I'm sure you'll be cheering for your teams. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.